The year's 1326, and the place is medieval England. A young boy dressed in fine clothes stands stiffly beside King Edward II as he enters Canterbury Cathedral. All eyes are on them both, wondering at the spectacle before them. For the past 2 years, this child has been the talk of the kingdom. Some call him a miracle, others a monster. All agree that he is beyond strange. As Edward moves through the crowd, he smiles warmly at those around him, completely unaware of the whispers about his strange new friend. After all, what could be more natural than a king taking great interest in a child who looks exactly like his beloved favorite? But here's the thing, Piers Gaveston has been dead for over 2 years now. Piers was more than just a favorite to Edward. He was his closest friend and confidant, his partner in wine, women and song. And when he died, Edward went mad with grief. Even his counselors and queen could do little to console him. Every night he would wake up screaming, and every day he would wander the halls of his castle, lost in thought. No one dared ask him what he was thinking. Everyone knew that whatever they said would only enrage the king further. Edward became obsessed with Piers and refused to accept that his friend was really gone. Then one day, while visiting his favorite hunting grounds, Edward came across a small cottage in the woods. Inside lived a young noble boy who looked exactly like Piers. The king immediately sent for the child, and began to tutor him in the ways of Piers, forcing him to speak and act like his favorite. The boy was only 10 years old and soon became too overwhelmed to resist his royal tutor. Day after day, he heard tales of Piers' exploits, until eventually he began to believe that he was Piers reincarnated. As the boy grew older, so did Edward's madness. Soon, he was parading the child around the kingdom, introducing him as the miraculously returned Piers. At first, people thought it was some kind of joke, but as time went on, they realized that Edward was serious. They couldn't believe their ears when he announced that the boy was truly Piers, come back from the dead. Many were skeptical, but Edward didn't care. He continued to parade the boy around and tell everyone that he was Piers, and slowly but surely, people began to believe him. The boy was now a celebrity throughout England. Everyone wanted to get a glimpse of the resurrected Piers, and Edward happily obliged. He lavished the boy with gifts and showered him with affection. He dressed him in fine clothes, fed him delicious food, and made sure that he had everything he could possibly want. In return, the boy did his best to live up to Edward's expectations. He tried to act like Piers, to speak like Piers, and to think like Piers. But deep down, he was just a scared little boy who didn't know what was happening to him. Edward was so obsessed with the boy that he made him his heir. This caused outrage among the nobility, who felt that Edward was mad to pass over his own son in favor of a child who was uneven his. But Edward didn't care what anyone else thought. He was convinced that the boy was Piers, and that was all that mattered to him. One day, Edward was out hunting when he heard some news that made him very angry. A group of barons had taken control of London and were demanding that he exile the boy from the kingdom. They accused the boy of being a witch and said that he had cast a spell on the king, making him behave so erratic. Edward was furious and vowed to punish the barons for their insolence. He returned to his castle and began making plans. He called for his knights and told them to ride out and put down the rebellion. He gave them full power to use whatever force necessary, and then watched as they rode away. Confident in their mission, the knights rode hard and soon reached the outskirts of London. There they met with the barons and demanded that they surrender the city peacefully. But the barons refused. They were prepared to fight and were confident in their ability to win. A battle then ensued between the knights loyal to Edward and the barons who controlled London. The fighting was fierce and neither side would back down. In the end, the barons won and Edward's knights were forced to retreat. The barons then entered London and took control of the city. They set up a puppet government in place of Edward and began making plans for the future of the kingdom. Edward was furious. He never expected to lose and was enraged that the barons had taken control of London. He paced back and forth in his castle, unable to understand how things had gotten so out of hand. Then he had an idea. He would use the boy as a bargaining chip. He would send him to the barons and demand that they release his knights in exchange for the boy. He believed that the barons would never harm the boy, because he was too valuable to Edward. He called for his counselors and told them of his plan. They were shocked, but ultimately agreed to help him carry it out. They drafted a letter to the barons, and then sent it off with a small escort. The letter simply stated that Edward was willing to trade the boy for his knights, and demanded that the barons respond quickly. The counselors then waited anxiously for a reply. When it came, it was clear that the barons had accepted Edward's offer. They would meet with him at a small village outside of London to exchange prisoners. Edward was furious. He knew that the barons had tricked him, but there was nothing he could do about it. He had to get the boy back. He called for his knights and told them to ride out to the village and rescue the boy. But when they arrived, it was too late. The barons had already taken the boy and were using him as leverage to force Edward to sign away his power. Edward was furious, but he knew that he couldn't do anything. The barons had him outnumbered and outgunned. They were going to do what they wanted and there was nothing he could do to stop them. And so it was that Edward II lost his crown and his sanity, all because of his obsession with a dead knight. The barons had taken the boy and were using him as leverage to force Edward to sign away his power. They dragged him through the streets of London, beating and jeering at him all the way to the palace. When they finally reached the throne room, Edward was a broken man. He had lost everything that had ever mattered to him, and he knew it. The barons gathered around him and demanded that he sign away his power. They told him that if he didn't, they would kill the boy right in front of him. Edward hesitated, but in the end he agreed. He signed the papers that would give the barons control of the kingdom and watched as they took his crown and placed it on the head of a new king. Then they took the boy and threw him in a dungeon where he would spend the rest of his life. Years passed and the boy grew older. He never forgot about Edward, the king who had loved him so much that he had been willing to give up his entire kingdom for him. As he sat in his cell, he wondered what had happened to Edward. Had he gone mad? Had he died? Or was he still alive, wandering the kingdom, looking for the boy who had been taken from him? The boy never found out what happened to Edward, but it didn't matter. He had his own story to live out, and in the end, that's all that mattered. Now, go watch. Why did medieval kings let commoners touch their genitals? Or click this other video instead. Rare medieval pictures you weren't supposed to see.